Screen Australia says a record $1.3 billion was spent creating Australian films and TV dramas last financial year. The organisation says nearly half of the funding came from overseas. The 50% boost in investments was largely driven by foreign-backed movies, including Peter Rabbit, and big-budget features such as Thor Ragnarok, Aquaman and Pacific Rim. There was also strong locally backed productions, including Sweet Country, Swinging Safari and Cargo. With more, here's Graeme Mason, the CEO of Screen Australia. Welcome, Graeme. You must be delighted with the years that's been.
It's great being here with such fantastic news and an amazing year. A record year up by about 50% on last year, so great result.
What's behind the improvement?
I think there's a couple of things. I think obviously there's a lot of big Hollywood films coming down to film here, as you mentioned in the intro. Exciting for us, though, on those is a lot of those were return businesses. So Disney, Marvel companies came back again. So they know how good our crews are, our facilities, how amazing the actors are too, that they can get into those productions. And even on a couple of those big Hollywood films, there's really good Australian connections to them. So obviously Chris Hemsworth is Thor, and you have Cate Blanchett in it. But also you have Taika Waititi, the director. He's a Kiwi, but just across the ditch. So I think there's a whole lot of those Australasian stars in front of and behind the camera who help make those decisions. Aquaman, you also mentioned, the director of that is James Wan, who is an Australian who mostly works in Hollywood. So that's fantastic. And then, of course, also on the local front, we have enormous interest in Australian stories still. On every network, there's multiple Australian dramas, I think for the first time in decades, and they're what people really want to watch. So you've got the perfect storm in a good way of those two things coming together.
So has it become easier for Australian producers to fund their projects?
I think it's still hard, there's no question, raising money on any project, and particularly on the independent Australian film and television ones. But what we're seeing now is, with the level of success and our star power, as I say, in front of and behind the camera internationally, there's an opportunity, I think, for all of us to leverage that story up and out.
And how's Australian TV and film holding up against the streaming services like Netflix and Amazon?
Well, what we've seen, those guys are very interested. There is a knock-on effect, however. I think a lot of the reason why the networks here, including the ABC, do so much local content is because it's a point of difference for them. The streamers pick up stuff from all over the world, whereas if you're Channel 7, 9, 10, Foxtel, SBS, the ABC, you're here. You understand more inherently in your DNA what Australians want to watch, and you're doing it all the time. So personally, I think that's a reason, that's an upside for all of them, and why they're so keen to still do more Australian content.
The only downside, Graeme, was children's TV drama. That was down quite considerably.
It is. I mean, kids, there's no escaping it. It's a point of concern for all of us. And it concerns me on multiple levels, because if we can't tell Australian stories in Australian voices to our kids, they're never going to get that moment again, and we'll have lost them for life. And so I think it's really essential that we look at what are we making for kids, but where are they watching it? I think that's just as vital, because if they're not consuming it on terrestrial TV the way they used to, where are they watching it? And I think we should be making some stuff for them there.
And how's the next 12 months looking?
It's looking pretty good. I mean, domestically, again, it's amazing. We've got lots of returning series, lots of dramas again. We've got some really great films. You mentioned there things like Sweet Country, which has just won prizes already in Venice and Toronto, and last week in Adelaide. We have Simon Baker's directorial debut, Breath, coming through on the Tim Winton book. Garth Davis, who did Lion, has got a film on Mary Magdalene coming out. So there's a lot of great things coming through. Picnic at Hanging Rock, made for television this year, which Amazon has bought for international. So there's a lot of good things.
Now, these allegations, while you're here, about Harvey Weinstein, of course, still rolling on. You've worked in the industry for 25 years, a lot of that in Hollywood. Were you aware of these allegations?
No, I mean, like many other people, I was aware of his reputation and my interactions with him of being a bully, there's no question. And he prided himself on a way of working, of reducing people to tears and to being blubbering masses, a mess. I didn't know about anything like this. It's massively concerning, and I think obviously we here need a moment to reflect on ourselves too, and just to make sure are we providing a safe environment for all people? Are we providing the great routes for people if they've got issues to come and talk about it? So it's something particularly Screen Australia, we're very involved in gender issues, and our gender task force, which in fact Michelle Guthrie, the MD of the ABC, is on that task force with us, on that group. And we are actively at this moment putting together something where we can try and address those two things to ensure, if it's been happening here, people have a way of changing but also getting a hearing for those issues.
Because right now there isn't that outlet there.
No, and I think the biggest trick on this stuff is often it's very hard for people, they're not in a position of power, which is how they can often be forced into these terrible positions. And also then even once, if it's happened, they've got no one to talk to. So I think we've got to ensure that the culture changes, that everybody knows it's unacceptable, and anyone who feels in trouble has a clear understanding of how they can get help.
Have you heard allegations of similar behaviour in the film and TV industry here?
I have not. And as you mentioned, I've only been back here for a little less than 4 years. Film, I think it's a different proposition because very few people are in that position of power. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. That hasn't come to my attention yet. I think the dynamics in our industry have been a little different, but to the Harvey Weinstein issue, but it is something we all need to look at, because often you have people working on a freelance basis, so they have very little power on a set or in a newsroom, and we have to ensure that feels like it could be an environment which promotes unsafe behaviour, so we need to look at it. And I think it's responsible of all of us who are in these positions now to be open and listen.
Graeme Mason, Head of Screen Australia, thank you.